The American public, even today, have no idea of what had happened to us. World War II time, they would consider us as draft dodgers, as traitors. As time went on, they began to realize we were now really trying to fight another battle, and where the people in the 442nd went out to fight the actual war in Europe and in Japan, whereas in our case we were now trying to fight more of a legal battle. I'm Takashi Hoshizaki. I was actually born in 1925 and have virtually lived in Los Angeles most of my life, except during the war years and my service time. Living, I guess, in the same building that I was born, there were more open areas, empty lot, a vacant area that my cousin and I played in. My dad then decided to start his own business, and so then we moved out to the Hollywood area. And the store he started in the Hollywood area was Fujiya cash and carry grocery stores. By 5 years later, he had saved enough money to buy a piece of property and then put a home on it. And 1937 was when we moved into our new home.
Greatest double cross in history. Jap envoys talk peace in Washington. Jap planes without warning bring war to America. Our great Pacific outpost in the Hawaiian Islands is ruthlessly bombed.
On February 19, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066. This order authorized the U.S. military to remove civilians from the west coast of the United States. The order did not specify any particular racial or ethnic group. However, Executive Order 9066 was used to specifically target people of Japanese ancestry, regardless of citizenship. In May of 1942, Takashi and his family were forced to leave their home in East Hollywood. The government sent them to the Pomona Assembly Center, located in Los Angeles County Fairgrounds. The Hoshizakis lived in poorly constructed, temporary barracks with hundreds of other families. In August of 1942, they were taken by train to the Heart Mountain Camp in Wyoming.
I think it's about a year and a half or later that I turned 18, and at that time that we were then required to register for the Selective Service.
In September 1940, over a year before the United States would enter World War II, President Roosevelt signed into law the Selective Training and Service Act. It required all men between the ages of 21 and 45 to register for the draft. Soon after the U.S. entered the war, the minimum age of registration was lowered to 18 and extended to age 65. The attack on Pearl Harbor also caused the U.S. military to change the classification of Japanese American men to 4C, alien enemy, meaning they were ineligible to serve. However, after over a year of fighting in the war, the U.S. military reversed its decision and reclassified Japanese American men as 1A, eligible to serve, meaning they could either voluntarily enlist in the Army or be drafted.
And I thought, well, this is crazy, you know. Here we were removed from our home, placed into these what we now will consider as really were concentration camps, and then they're drafting us out. Why, as one of the other fellows said, he says, why should I go back and fight for civil rights and other things that the U.S. government had denied us? And so it was just one of these things. So things don't seem right, and I decided that, okay, I won't answer the draft call. And it was about, I guess, maybe a week or so later that the FBI, the marshals, then came around and picked me up. There were a total of 63 of us that had refused to go. There were so many of us that I think we filled most of the county jails in Wyoming.
In March of 1944, Takashi was arrested for violation of the Selective Service Act. Approximately 5,000 American men nationwide resisted the draft and were convicted of draft violations. Almost 300 of these men were Japanese Americans from 8 of the 10 War Relocation Authority camps. 63 resistors lived in the Heart Mountain camp, including Takashi.
We had decided before the trial really began as to whether we'll have a jury trial or a judicial trial. And being at the wartime, the group felt that it would be very hard to get a jury that would be sympathetic to our thoughts. We bypassed the jury, hoping that the judge would then look at all the facts and come to a conclusion. Judge Kennedy, we find out that he was a racist, so things didn't go too well. So basically then we ended up with a 3-year sentence.
19-year-old Takashi was convicted of knowingly and willfully violating the Selective Service Act of 1940. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison at McNeil Island. McNeil Island was a federal penitentiary often compared to Alcatraz because of its location on a small island in Washington state.
So while there, I got a chance to then meet the other prisoners, the conscientious objectors. I think we comprised something like 2/3 of the population there on the farm at the time. And the other prisoners would range all the way from murderers, burglars, and the whole line. I had an interview with the warden, and he asked me how did I feel about being in the prison, and my response is, well, he says, I feel no different from being in camp. Searchlights, barbed wire, and restricted movements and so forth. But then I told him the only thing I would miss would be the family. With a 3-year sentence, we should then have appeared at a parole board to see if we would be released. 2 of the fellows working in the office at McNeil Island in the prison, in the warden's office, found letters from the camp directors indicating that do not give them a pardon because then it would be like a slap on the wrist instead of service in the military.
Takashi was released from McNeil Island Federal Penitentiary on July 14, 1946, nearly 16 months after he was eligible for parole. His conviction, along with 1,500 men, was pardoned by President Truman on December 23, 1947.
When I got my second draft notice, the Korean War was on, and I was still young enough to be eligible, and there were apparently 6 of us who were still young enough from the Heart Mountain group that then served during the Korean conflict. I did have my civil rights back, and I was part of the U.S. community, enjoying the advantages of it. It's all right if it comes to being that I would be given the draft notice, all right, I would be more willing to go ahead and serve,
Today, Takashi and the other Japanese American resistors might have been able to make a case for deferment of the draft. This would be possible because they were incarcerated in concentration camps at the time.
But again, how do you get the people to really read or listen and understand the lack of civil rights in certain situations? But how do you educate the people on the civil rights and on the Constitution?